will know. All right. We are now going to get to real world stuff. There's a lot of news to cover. There's a lot of news to talk about. Specifically, we're going to talk about Israel-Palestine. You know, the Harkonnens are continuously bombing. Hard the entire time. Popcorn bucket activities for sure. Yes, we're going to get to the real world shit now. And I'm also going to pee.
Ceasefire talks are happening in Cairo, but the Israelis haven't sent a delegation. That's because Hamas is refusing to send them a list of the hostages, who's alive and who's dead. That might be a negotiating position by Hamas, or it might be that they really don't know, because Israel has decimated Hamas. It doesn't have proper communications. They really might not know which hostages are held where and which are alive and dead. But at the same time, a member of the Israeli war cabinet, Benny Gantz, is in Washington. Now, he is supposed to be meeting Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, probably around now, and later Kamala Harris, the vice president. But he is there without the approval of his boss, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu does not want Gantz, who he sees as a political rival, talking to the Americans. He wants to talk to the Americans. But it's a sign also that the Americans, they're really running out of patience with Netanyahu. They see him as intransigent and hardline, and they are sending a message that they would rather deal with Gantz, who they see as more moderate. They regard him as more reasonable. But all of this means that the ceasefire, it looks more distant. And it looks as if the Israeli government is in some kind of disarray. What does that mean on the ground in Gaza City, where they're not getting enough aid, and where without a ceasefire they're not going to get enough aid? Well, it looks like we're going to see more children dying of starvation. For 5 months, neither bombing nor fighting has forced them to leave Gaza City. But now, hunger is driving people south in search of something, anything, to feed their children.
We've reached a stage of hunger like never before. When my daughter wants to eat in the morning, I can't provide her with food or drink. Where am I going to get it? No Arab government blinking an eye, nor our leadership, nor anyone. They've abandoned us.
People get water from tanks, some of it salty. Israeli bombing has destroyed wells and pipes. They transport it as best they can. Life in Gaza City. The Israel Defense Forces are still fighting Hamas in Gaza. But Israel's closest ally is losing patience after last Thursday's incident in which at least 100 Gazans were killed when Israeli soldiers shot into a crowd trying to grab food from an aid convoy.
The Israeli government must...
This was interesting, I will say. Kamala Harris's takes were interesting. They did use, like, you know, ceasefire for the first time, but the amount of words that the ceasefire term was sandwiched in between kind of like deviates away from the major point of contention. But here, let's
do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuse. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid. They must ensure humanitarian personnel, sites, and
It's like crazy because like the conditional, the language is very interesting. Maybe I'm too much of a nerd when it comes to communication, but they say unnecessary restrictions. So they can impose restrictions on the aid, just not unnecessary. Right?
Any unnecessary new border.
Look here, let's
no
break
excuses.
it down.
They must open new border crossings.
They must open new border crossings, which could mean to like let in aid, or which could mean let out the Palestinians so that the ethnic displacement can continue.
They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid.
Unnecessary restrictions, unnecessary being a very important word here, as in there could be necessary restrictions on the humanitarian aid. So Israel still gets to dictate what the necessary restrictions are. Okay? So that's another important thing to understand.
They must ensure humanitarian personnel, sites, and convoys are not targeted.
No.
That last part is like, you know, pretty straightforward. Don't target the fucking convoys, right? Good. That's a good one. Basically, if you believe that Israel is targeting the humanitarian convoys, which they are, then you're like, oh, okay, good. If you go along with the Israeli narrative that the convoys are being targeted by Hamas, and that's why they have to shoot all of the Palestinians that are near the convoys, which according to hospitals on the ground and a UN investigation that was conducted off of the doctors that are there, 80%, close to 80% in certain hospitals that were treated of wounds were treated for gunshot wounds, and not because they were like, not because the trucks had driven over them and trampled. So that's something to remember. I'm certain that people were still trampled over by other people in crowd crush, and also due to the trucks driving away. But the trucks drove away because the IDF shot at the direction of the trucks. So a lot of people were, however, still treated. The majority of the people were treated for gunshot wounds.
Or has Israel stopped bombing Gaza?
So I'm going to dive into Kamala Harris's full take in a second, because I think it's important to look at the entirety of the take, because it's framed in a way where it's like Hamas is not negotiating with Israel. But let's continue here for now.
Overnight, they struck 2 residences in Rafah. The Americans are calling for an immediate ceasefire, but Hamas has rejected Israel's demand for a list of Israeli hostages. So the killing goes on. As they bury their dead, the people of Gaza are cast into despair.
This is extermination. Shame on them. They need to stop the bloodshed. Why? Why are they killing us? Why don't they tell us, we want to kill you all in one go and throw one bomb and just get it over and done with?
A funeral in the West Bank too, for 16-year-old Mustafa Abu Shalbak, caught up in an Israeli raid on Ramallah today. Used threw stones and Molotov cocktails at Israeli soldiers who responded with live fire. It was the most extensive incursion into the West Bank's capital for many years.
The major point of contention here isn't the Hamas not releasing all of the hostage names, by the way. I know that is what Israel is framing it as. However, the major point of contention here is actually the terms and negotiations of the ceasefire. Hamas made it very clear from the jump that they want a permanent ceasefire, like leading up to a permanent ceasefire in increments through the hostage release process. The hostage release process was going to have like an immediate ceasefire with a chunk of hostages, with a prisoner swap, basically, with the hostages, the Palestinian hostages that Israel keep, to the tune of tens of thousands. Okay, this guy, you are so lost, dude. Holy shit, this man, both anti-Semitic, but in the most like Nazi way. Lord Herrenvolk says Jews are commie scum. How lost can you be? Like, that's the OG Nazi shit. Like, OG Nazi takes. But anyway, as I was saying, yeah, dude thinks it's 1939. Nice. Yeah, my man, he literally came in and started talking about Judeo-Bolshevism. Yes, Hamas's proposal was divided into multiple stages with hostage exchanges from both sides and ending with a settlement to end the war. Exactly. And those are the conditions that Israel does not want to engage in. The Biden administration is trying to hammer home the narrative that, oh, like an at least 6-week ceasefire first and foremost, and then we'll see. I think for 2 reasons they're doing this. One, because they, God forbid, they come across as like remotely critical of Israel. Holy shit, right? The other reason is because Benjamin Netanyahu, we know, in the interest of self-preservation for his damn self, wants to continue the ethnic cleansing campaign, because the longer the war continues, the longer he can stay in power. So it is a really bad state of affairs from an administration that genuinely refuses to listen to their own voters and listen to any kind of conscience or any kind of morality in this matter.
Years, the Israelis said this was a counter-terrorism operation in which they apprehended 2 suspects inciting materials spread by Hamas. Ceasefire in Gaza is one thing. A solution to the wider conflict is quite another. This is happening at the same time as another ugly row is brewing between the Israeli government and the UN Relief and Works Agency. That's the UN organization charged with looking after Palestinian refugees. About an hour ago, the Israeli government put out what it claimed were intercepts, which it said proved that 2 UNRWA teachers from Gaza had participated in the killings of October the 7th. Now, that happens, as UNRWA has said, that many members of its staff have been detained by the Israelis from Gaza, and that when they were released, they debriefed them and found that, as UNRWA says, they were tortured, and there was also what they call sexual exploitation. Now, that feeds into a wider problem. We know that the Israeli Defense Force have been arresting people in Gaza. They have been taking people for interrogation to find out where Hamas is, as you might expect. But there are more and more allegations that people have been mistreated in custody. And this is brewing into a terrible argument. And we still don't know how many people are being held and exactly what kind of treatment they're enduring.
حسن خالد معك كيف حالك؟ سلامات.
Okay. Let's look at Kamala Harris's takes. There's also a report that came out of the United Nations today. Clear and convincing information that hostages held in Gaza subjected to sexual violence as UN Special Representative. We're going to be talking about that as well. Unrelated, but I love this lady talks.